Peter Fettke, two esteemed colleagues and very good friends of mine. I could spend a lot of time talking about both of these personalities, not least Wolfgang standing here next to me. And I will just confine myself to saying that Wolfgang is a nestor of computer science in Germany. He's Professor Emeritus at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and has done many things for computer science in Germany, but in particular, some of you might know him from his work on the theory of processes, and so Wolfgang, but that I'm gonna let you be introduced. Peter Fettke is a professor at the German Research Institute for AI, DFKI, and also and at the University the Saarland. I think you're called the principal research fellow in the DFKI and a professor at the University the Saarland. And they will be talking about, the topic that's on the title. And the way it's going to happen is that I will first hand over to Wolfgang, who will introduce the topic briefly, and then Peter will take over and give the first talk of this morning's session, and then after a coffee break at sort of 10:45-ish, we will come back at 11 and have the second talk to be given by Wolfgang. Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
Jakob, thank you very much. I must correct you, I will not give an introduction to the topic, but I will speak about the environment in which this topic is put and why we have chosen this topic. Okay, so originally I didn't intend to say a lot, but on my sheet of paper it became more and more, and so I have to look at the paper, and I would like to start with two quotes to make a good atmosphere. So the first quote is by von Neumann. I think everybody in the room knows von Neumann, and he said, "The sciences do not try to explain, they hardly even try to interpret, they mainly make models." So that's not me, that's von Neumann who said this. And you should think about, if you think informatics is a science, what about these models, the models of informatics? But the second quote is by Albert Einstein, and he said, "Whenever I have to solve a problem and I get 1 hour to solve it, I take 55 minutes to understand the problem and then 5 minutes to solve it." Okay, so now we look at informatics, and what we see is a pure disaster, because usually when software is made, you will hear something about a problem, you don't really understand the problem, you're not really interested in understanding it, because you immediately start to make code. That is informatics. And in the light of those quotes, it's not a miracle that informatics has so poor quality of what they deliver. Okay? Everybody is quiet. Okay. So when did the mistake start? The mistake start. I think the starting point of all these problems is a very famous meeting in 1968 in Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Germany, where they also coined the notion of software engineering. And they said we need engineering aspects for informatics. And what did they do afterwards? Instead of doing what they should have done, they started to define different programming languages. Monster languages like... No, aha! So Frank says programming language is a model. That is true. That is one of the most pure and stupid models you can make, because it's not intended to be a good model for persons, it's just a model to be executed. Yeah. So it is a model, but the most idiotic model in the world. So, but that was the central point of this stupid conference, that they then started to make this Well, on one hand, the monster languages like PL1 and IBM, where he was, and Algo 68, who remembers Algo 68? Fantastic. Everybody had the big report. There was never a reasonable interpreter for that. And of course, nobody ever ran.
Yes.
There are some, in Holland, there are some implementations of parts of it, but not the full. And later on, there came Ada, that was also such a. And on the other hand, we had very small languages like Pascal, that was fine for the universities. And then the development of programming languages became more and more involved. Instead of what they should have done, they should have not developed programming languages, but modeling languages, which they did not do. And we should not educate programmers, but we should educate modelers. But Frank always says yes, 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 but he doesn't do it.
BPMN.
But we did it with SQL. You
Also.
can define tables, you can express whatever you want out of your data.
Absolutely.
Okay. So in the area of data, in databases, there were some kind of models, but that is a simple word. So that you have.
We make it
It is
simple
the
that
word
you understand.
Yeah, complexity is as a principle. So a relational database is nothing complicated, and that is good. That is
Did you study relational algebra?
That is a fine algebra. Yeah, that is good. That is property.
You won't make it.
Okay, so I could continue for hours about the topic, but I was stopped. So
We meet for a beer, shooting again, and continue.
So, but this is the world where we are in. And then Peter and I, we asked ourselves, what could be, I think you remember, many of you who had been here last year remember what we suggested, because now we know how to model something, especially we have shown you how to make components and their composition. So composition of components is one of the most fundamental problems in the world of modeling when you make a real big model. So you need a concept of composition of components, and that was so far not very well done, let me say it like this. So Peter and I, we asked ourselves, we would like to present you a problem or a class of problems which is relevant, which is difficult to model, which gives us general and many concrete systems, which are examples of this kind of modeling. And of course, the systems aspect must be there. That means, of course, software is somewhere involved, but also people are involved, organizations are involved, mechanical devices are involved. All this together makes a system, of which part, as I said, is software. So we thought, what kind of problem should we present you? And then we came up with the idea to say the problems of mediation or negotiation or bargaining, or nowadays it's all about making deals. Everybody wants to make deals. This world we must understand better. Okay? And how to model principles in this world. And then we came up that there is a kind of a paradigm in this world, and I'm almost finishing. The paradigm for all this is, say, economy or auctions or markets or public sale or stock exchange, which are all multi-agents. So this is the world where we should have, we urgently need some modeling techniques. And now I'm already finished. I think it was quick. And Peter starts.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you. And you illustrated a very important principle as well, namely the principle that says that there is nothing more dangerous than a retired German professor. So, Peter, you now have the rest of our slot to talk about markets, a paradigm for agents in the digital world, the principles.
Hello, everybody. Actually, Wolfgang and I synchronized about the beginning of the talk, so it's no problem that he already talked 10 minutes, not just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'd like to start my talk with a little introduction I will give you the main aspects of the talk in a short nutshell. And as you already see, we are talking about markets. And I think everybody of you knows what a market is. Actually, you have some intuitive understanding. And the idea of markets, in fact, is very old. It's not a new one. There are some new aspects, but in fact, the ideas of markets has a very, 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 very long history. If you have a deeper look what the market is, you have something like supply, some agents like to sell something on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have some buyers. You have some kind of demand. And as Wolfgang already said, the supply and the demand has to be synchronized. They have to make some deals. And after the deal is closed, then you have some kind of settlement. And which kind of settlement took place typically depends on the type of product. You have products for baguettes, for houses, for kidneys, for partners. There are lots of different products and services. And what is now the interesting thing? How the trading system, how the synchronization between the supply and demand really can take place. How is it synchronized? How it is defined? How it is managed? And of course, there are some rules and there are some arrangements. And these rules and arrangements are typically described in a natural way, or there are some laws, or there's a software system where the laws are also already described in software. But the interesting thing is that the behavior of the agent and the behavior of the complete market must be defined in a precise and understandable way. Because you can imagine if an agent, as a seller and a buyer, have some conflicts, then it might be necessary that the deal is settled by some government or by some law institution. So you need some rules which has to be enforced on the market. If you now look, what are markets? How do you describe them? It is pretty clear that in today's society, markets are really important. Markets are everywhere. Today we have a market here on the beach, some souvenir markets. Here in the room we have some kind of paper markets, some papers as conferences, and the conference committee try to decide which papers can be accepted. It can also be seen as a market. There are some other markets. Think about your partners. You're looking for a partner. Today we have electronic markets for that. So markets are everywhere. Mostly every dealing of services and products can be understood as a kind of market. As I already said, electronic techniques like communication technologies have a huge impact on the definition of markets. Today we do not only have physical products or physical services, we have electronic products. Think about music, films, books, and things like that. These are not physical products. These aspects, these products, these services are completely digital. So the complete market complete market offering and selling and buying, the dealing and the settlement can completely done on an electronic market. This typically changed. If you look 2,000 years back, there you have, for example, a small village, and there were some previous tenders, and they were dealing. And there's a situation that's completely different to a marriage market you can choose on your smartphone, for example. Think about Tinder or something like that, completely different markets. If you look at some particular aspects of financial products, for example, Wolfgang already mentioned the stock markets. There you have electronic trading, and the traders who like to develop agents, software agents, are really interested in that the servers are mostly at the coordinator of a complete market, because you have some latencies between the buyers and the sellers and the market development. So it's really important. But why is this really important? How do you describe this? Particularly if there's some conflicts between different buyers and sellers. So you really need a good description. And also, on such markets, the microseconds are sometimes important, because if you're quicker with your offers or quicker in buying something, it's really important you have to describe it. And as Wolfgang also already mentioned, markets can be seen as multi-agent systems. You have buyers, you have sellers, you have some market coordinator. So it might be understood a market as a multi-agent system. But on the other hand, if you look more from an economic point of view, a market can also be overall the more general concept of a multi-agent systems. There might be different coordination systems. So if you really try to answer this question on a precise formal understanding, then you need a much better understanding what markets are really. And of course, there are many, many more questions. If you look at the economic literature, then there are lots of different understandings of what markets are. A very typical model is shown on this slide. You have two axes. On one axis, you describe the quantity which is dealt on the market. On the other axis, you see the price. Then you have two functions, a supply function and a demand function. And what is typically analyzed that during the analysis, the equalness of demand and supply tries to be identified. And at this point, you have some kind of equilibrium. And this equilibrium point, you have some equilibrium price and some equilibrium quantity. And what is typically a model in the economic sense for understanding that you use some kind of continuous function. No discrete functions, which is typically used in informatics. You use typically some kind of complete functions. Also, if you look at the understanding how the different prices might change, then you try to model the dependency of the demand and the supply from the factor of time. This is a typical understanding. From a mathematical point of view, the complete apparatus of the calculus is used to study the change. Here on the left-hand side, you see the typical function. It's a demand function, a supply function, and then you try to use the integer calculus or the differential calculus to really understand how the behavior on the market might change. This is a very, very interesting understanding, and Wolfgang already gave us a quote from John von Neumann. Here's another one, and John von Neumann said the calculus was the first achievement of modern mathematics, and it is difficult to overestimate its importance for many, many different sciences and for many, many different technologies, and also for the understanding of markets. And now, we don't want to say that these models are wrong. Of course not. They are useful in many, many different situations, but we like to put forward the idea that there are other models, other methods to really understand the behavior of markets. And we like to argue that new models are really needed to understand the digital world, and particularly to understand digital markets and the world of today. Okay, that was a quick overview of my talk. I'd like now to understand the digital world from a more general perspective. Today, I think it's not new for all of us. We live in a digital world. Don't want to read all the different aspects. We have books, we have entertainment, phones, products. Everything is digital today. But what is now the interesting question? What is really the core of the digital world? I think you can all agree that the core aspect is that the digital world is not analog anymore. But what other aspects? What is really the core aspects of the digital world? And if you look at different definitions, at different understandings, I think there are many, many different ways what are really important in the digital world. And one interesting thing is electronic data. Electronic data might be most important in the digital world. Data is not stored on analog devices anymore. Data today is stored in an electronic way. We're used to it. Another aspect might be the automated actions. Typically, the computer today is not anymore some job which try to do some calculations as 80 years ago. Today, a computer is the machine which really try to put forward to enhance our capabilities for operations of our mind. So it's an amplifier of our brain compared to a steam machine which try to amplify our physical stamina. And this is of course another aspect of the digital world. And of course, the digital world in which we live can be seen as some kind of cyber-physical system. We have the idea of a metaverse, we have the idea of a cyber-physical production system, we live in the internet. This is a totally different aspect of the digital world. But all these aspects together might form the digital world, but we try to argue that in all these aspects, one thing is really important, and this thing we like to stress now. And what is really the core aspect of the digital world? I'd like to give you a very simple example. Here you see two different steps, step A and step B. Some of you might already know the notation, particularly if you know the background of Wolfgang, it's pretty clear. You have some event A, and the event A happens before the event B. Or another understanding, we say event A is the cause of event B. It's a very simple example. But what is really interesting in the digital world, that you also might have another event, here event C, and event C is independent of events A and B. There's no causal relationship between these three different events. And this is really important. Some key observations. A is independent of C. C is independent of B. But A is not independent of B. In fact, there's a causal relation between A and B. So the independence relation of causality is not transitive. And this is a very, very important aspect. The causal independence is not transitive, but A is not independent of B. In fact, A causes B. And this is a very interesting thing. If you look at the digital world, there are events which are in causal order, and some events are independent. And the independence, as you already discussed, the example of the programming language, is not only in the computer program, it's also in the world around us, in the organizational system. Different buyers, different sellers in the physical world are independent of the placement of orders and sell orders. And this independence has to be described in some interesting way, in some interesting model, and not in the programming language, because the programming language only focuses on the execution part. Let's look at a deeper understanding of this. Here you have two different causal independence relations. You have one line at the top, one line at the bottom, and here's a red causal line. At the bottom there's a blue causal line, and now you can think of that at the red causal line you can have some kind of clock, for example, and of this causal line you have some ticks. The clock ticks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you have some total order, but just on your causal line. In this example, you have also a clock on the blue causal line. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 8. But in the overall system, you do not have some total order. It's just a partial order. So if you look now at the both clocks, at the red clock and the blue clock, you have no global understanding of time. For example, if you're at the fourth click of the blue clock, you don't know which time is the red clock. It's independent. What is now interesting, of course, sometimes there is a need for synchronization. We have an example. We have a new causal link between the fourth click and the second click. And of course, then you have some understanding of the time at that point, but it's on another causal line. The red clock ticks on the red causal line and not on the blue causal line. I see you, everything is nodding, everybody is nodding, it's really great. If you have any questions, just put your hand forward. Oh yeah.
The clocks are supposed then to still be synchronized.
Pardon again?
The clocks Synchronized.
Not
They do the tick at the same moment.
No, they are not synchronized.
Okay, so you have a partial order of...
Yes, you have a partial order. That's the important thing. Here,
Why is it a 4 and not a 5?
because the red clock is on that partial line.
Okay.
I completed some more synchronization, just in case for this example. Here you now have the second synchronization at that point, and now at the 8th click of red clock, you also know that the 8th click of red clock is after the second click of the blue clock, so it's another important synchronization, but you don't know what about the steps 5, 6, and 7. Do they happen in independence of the step of the blue step? They happen after the 4th and before the 8th, but what is happening in between is independent of the causal line of the blue.
If you allow questions, do you need to avoid synchronization? Because in physics, you know, the light cones, there are places in space that can't communicate at all. And you fold that in.
Actually, as I go back, here's no synchronization.
Yeah, can you prevent the person to draw a line to synchronize? Because it can't happen.
Prevent.
Yeah, because in
If you-
physics, you have light cones that can calculate.
Actually, I'm talking not about the analog physical world, I'm talking about
Smart.
discrete models.
I accept that. That is
Yeah,
smart.
this is the important thing, that we talk about causality in discrete models. It's important thing.
Yeah. But even in discrete models, the discrete parts are far away. They can't
Yeah.
communicate.
Yeah, as you see. They're far away.
We take it off.
They're far away. They are not synchronized. Oh yeah.
Just to say that discrete events not necessarily have to happen in discrete time, right? I mean, they can happen in continuous time.
I know
and
we
the
already
subset
talked
of
about
time points where events happen is a discrete line.
Yeah. Actually, we talked before what is the understanding of discrete and continuous time, and I'm not accept this understanding of this. If you say right at the beginning, I have a global clock which allows me to have continuous time or discrete time, then this does not make sense. But I do not follow this assumption that there is a global
No,
clock.
I think this is still all consistent.
Yeah.
So,
I'd like to introduce a third causal line, just for the sake of the example. It's a green causal line, and also of the green causal line, you have, in this example, a clock. And you see, if you really have 3 different clocks, you still have clocks and times in all over the system, but you still cannot say, based on the clocks, which events really happens before and after. There is always some causal independence between different things which are happening. Look at the example. Here at the end, you have on the red clock 8, on the green clock 8, on the blue clock 9. And if you compare it with the timing frequency in the middle, then you see 8 and 8, it's at the same point. 9 and 8, it looks on the green clock that this event happens after the event at the bottom. But if you look at the blue clock, you see 6 is smaller than 9, so this event is before. So there is no total order of the different events. And if you try to visualize this in another way, here for example, the event A, you have some parts in this run which is the cause of the event, you have some parts which is the effect of the event A, and something is independent. And this is really important to understand causality and dynamics in the digital world. I have another example here for event E. Here's the effects of the event E. Here's the colon of the cause of event E. And some events, something has happened independent of the event. Also, a third example, event B, some effects of event B. This is also the cause of the event A, and here is the independence of event A. So let me try to summarize what is, from my understanding, the core of the digital world. We have discrete steps. This is really important. No continuous behavior, just discrete behavior. The discrete steps try to partially order cause, effect, and independence. There's no total order, there's just a partial order. And then the relation to the time is the clock time follows causal time and not the other way around. And I think this is the main difference, Holger, to your understanding, if you assume a global clock, that we assume that the clock time really follows from the quotient.
Does not contradict causal time, I guess. Is enough.
Okay, after giving you the core idea of our modeling understanding the digital world, I'd like now to move to understanding markets. And of course, the first thing I'd like to ask, what is a market? We already talked about it, but the idea of markets is not new, as I already said. And what is really interesting, that marketing is a discipline which developed over the last 40 or 50 years. Here I have a quote from the Nature magazine from 1967, where the quotation "marketing is king" was coined. And if you look at the article, marketing should be the paramount activity in the company's operations and must antedate and determine even the discovery in the research laboratory. So even the engineers was already told, look at the marketing of your scientific research. And at this moment, I'd like to make a small commercial break. I'd like to say we have out our new book on Heraclit, just published, and I'd like to quote something from the management section of the book. This text passed through a number of iterations, incorporating numerous recommendations of colleagues and students. And in particular, we are grateful for remarks and improvements suggested by many participants of the summer school meetings in Herosinos. So we'd like really to thank you, all of you, that we had the opportunity for discussing our ideas on Heraclit on this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the commercial break is over now. What is a market? At the end of the last year, Darun Acemoglu won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his research, and he also has a famous textbook on economics, and there you find a quote, what is a market is, and he says, a market is a group of economic agents, the same term as typically used in computer science, and the agents are typically trading goods or services plus the rules and arrangements for trading. This is a typical definition which is given in economic textbooks. Why is this interesting? It's a group of economic agents. So you have sellers. Typically what's interesting, what kind of sellers? Are they very powerful? What is the demand of the sellers? What is the type of the sellers? How many number of sellers do you have? Just one, or do you have a couple one? Which is typically a very important thing. If you have sellers, you also have buyers on the other hand. It's another important thing in that. What is also interesting is the types of goods and services. It really depends. You can say we have a global market where it's everything trade, or you can say you have one particular market, for example, just the souvenir markets down the beach. Very particular market, totally different. And what we like really stress, that on the market there are rules and arrangements for the trading. How to sell, how to buy, and how to discover the prices on the market. There's no natural way for price discovery. These are just systems made by humans to organize, to institutionalize our ways of trading goods and services in the world. And this is really important. Here's some different examples. Think about housing markets. On the right top is an example of a today's fair. As I said at the beginning, if you looked, for example, during the medieval times, in each village. It was not untypical to have a fair every year. It's very interesting. Some kind of trading goods between different faraway villages. Some auctions, also stock markets. So there are really, really many different things. But now I'd like to focus on the baguette market, on the bread market. And in my first example, there's a small little supermarket, and Frank liked to buy a baguette. Very simple example.
Beer would be better, but that's okay.
Do you like to drink beer, buy beer? I think it doesn't matter in this example, but maybe €5 for beer might be exact. What is interesting, in this first example there's a price tag, and on the other hand, if the market should work, you need some buyer. On the other hand, actually I see that the example is a little bit different. You are not the buyer of the beer, you are the seller of the beer. So there's Gina, and Gina bids on that market €7 for the baguette. Frank tries to sell the baguette for €5, and then there is some agreement. And in this simple case, what is an agreement? Do you already know?
Go ahead. I grabbed some.
Yeah, you grabbed 7, yeah. But actually, look at the top of the slide,
Yeah.
a price tag with fixed price.
A fixed price.
Yeah. Fixed prices.
Then it's 5.
Then it's 5, yeah. It's very simple. If you have fixed prices, then price is 5 for the baguette, even if Gina is able to bid 7. And now you might say, oh, it's not very realistic. And of course, you're right, it's not very realistic, but we are in the European Union, and in the European Union, there's a European Price Indication Directive, and there it is written, the selling price must be unambitious, easily identifiable, and clearly legalable. So it's really necessary in the European Union that in supermarkets, every item has a price tag. It's enforced by law. And if some software system tries to implement something different, it does not conform to European law. In supermarket, in the software system for supermarket. If you're going on under in other markets, then the situation is different. And also, if you have a clearer look at the European Price Indication Directive, you really identify lots of different other products where this indicator is not necessary to follow, but on the general level, you have to follow it. And if some supermarket does not use the price tags, then he is not conform to European law. Interesting case for lawyers, and sometimes it happens. So this simple case is more or less very realistic. But let me look at another situation. A couple of days ago, I looked for a new house. Really nice on Crete. I discovered this house, and I tried to bargain about the price. There's, of course, one seller of this wonderful house, again Frank, and in this case Frank sells it for 5 million, and in this case Gina bids 9 million, and now the trading can take place in this situation. And in a very simple situation, if you look at the top of the slide, it's like a bazaar. You have no rules, everything is possible, and in a very simple case, for example, Frank and Gina made a deal with 7 million. Frank asked for 5, Gina bids 9, and they come to the middle of 7. And of course, what is really important, if you made the deal, the settlement. If you just have the buying contract, you don't have even buy or sell the product, so it's really necessary that the contract is fulfilled during the settlement. But what also can happen, Frank asked 5, Gina bids just 1, and what now happens? Nothing. They can't agree on a typical price. And in this case, the reason might be very, very different, but it's very simple in that one. Nobody liked to buy this house for 5 millions. Even 1 million might be too much. But also on the bazaar, something totally different happens. Here you have one seller, one buyer, and another buyer. The second buyer, Anne, bids 9. Gina still bids 7. But Frank makes a deal with Gina. Because in this situation, there are no rules. Of course, if Frank would be able to identify Anne, then he could realize a better price. Not for Gina, but for Anne. Because in this situation on the bazaar, it just happened, the new wonderful house is sold to Gina. And although Anne tried to bid more, no coordination. What is also very interesting, you can of course have 2 different buyers, 2 different sellers. And in this situation, it is so that Gina buys for 3 and Anna buys for 5 from Sharon.
But you see, Sharon is more greedy.
More greedy, yeah. Or more successful, it really depends. But what also could happen, the same starting situation, but the dynamics evolve in a different way. And here, Frank sells to Anne. And you'll see Sharon and Gina are not coordinated anymore. Although it would be possible. This is a very interesting thing. This is very typical. And this is a point where I like to explain to you a small little story. It's the story of the happy customer and the carpet trader. And the story goes like that the happy customer enters the shop of the carpet trader and directly recognizes a wonderful carpet. Wonderful colors, wonderful size, wonderful patterns. Directly asks the carpet trader, what is the price of the carpet? And the carpet trader says, oh, this wonderful carpet is of high quality. It's really beautiful, this carpet. And then the carpet trader asks, then the customer asks, yeah, but tell me the price. Tell me the price. And the carpet trader answered, okay, for you, happy customer, I make you a very, very special price. Just for you, a special price. Just 2 million euros. Then the happy customer says, okay, I take it. After paying the carpet in cash, the carpet trader looks really angry, not so happy anymore. And the customer recognized it and asked him, why are you not happy? You asked for 2 million and I gave you the money in cash. You should be happy. And the carpet trader says, yeah, yes, but if I would know that you directly accept my first offer, then I wouldn't have to ask for 2 million, but for 3 million. On the way home, the happy customer was thinking about the deal, and he recognized that it was not a clever idea to take that the first price on the bazaar. Yeah, that's the reason why there are so many more different possibilities for arranging the settlement and the trading. For example, some auctions, and we already here have some auctions. And if I look at the time, I will just give you a very quick expression how they work, and Wolfgang will dig deeper into that in the next talk. So I just see there are some auctions and many different understandings of that. Don't want into details now. Also, there's a stock market, and in the stock market it is very important that you have a central registry of all offers and sells, and so that all events are really synchronized. And of course, there are many, many more different ways of really understanding it. Don't go into details, just make some conclusions. What is really interesting on that, if you really understand the digital world, you need some discrete steps that partially order what is happening in the digital world. And particularly if you look at digital markets, then the rules and arrangements. Think about Ajimoglu, mentioned it in the definition of what markets is, rules and arrangements for trading. And the rules and arrangements are not software, just some organizational settings. And these rules and arrangements must be described in a precise way that we really understand the problem and we propose that these rules are described in the way of modeling causal understanding of behavior. In this talk, I gave you some examples for the bazaar, for auctions, for stock markets. I don't want to get into details on that. But it's now really interesting. You might say, oh, these are just some examples. Frank is buying something, Sharon is selling something, and Gina is buying something. But what is really the general case? And the general case is typically a system model, and the system model is the focus of the next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have time for a question. Yes.
So thank you very much for the talk. I have a couple of remarks. Maybe you can use them for the next year's iteration.
Yeah.
Okay. So one is, okay, I understand that you presented the idea of the markets as the beginning, but in my impression, the markets are basically acting as a facade to persuade the existence of rational agents. This is actually also discussed a lot in economic theory. And so you have rational agents which by definition are individualistic. So very few people, research actually looks at the systemic ecosystems perspective of the overall picture. So in other words, the markets are actually just the servants to one with the bigger guns. This is what we currently observe very much. So what I mean with this is that maybe the markets, also if you observe, I observed your talk very carefully, there is a clear lack of connection between markets and then the rest of the modeling that you have shown. So that's why I was saying the market is acting as a facade to actually what you're presenting. What I would propose is to look at, since we are in Greece, to look at the work of Yanis Varoufakis, who are probably familiar with, and really clearly begin your journey at the techno-feudalism. So really dissect what is happening with the techno-feudalism, that we are in fact now renting our services from the techno-feudalists, the Amazons, the Googles, etc. And what does it do with us? And I think that this would be a very helpful thing, because what techno-feudalism is actually doing to us is that these guys are very familiar with the systemic ecosystems. What does it do with overall? And we need to counter this. And I think that the big disconnect with your approach and maybe more the systems people is this. You're saying the bazaar has no rules, but this is very far from the truth. Bazaar is full of rules. Maybe they are not explicit, but the bazaar has rules, and these rules are in forms of protocols. So people, it was shining through a little bit with your carpet example, right? So there are rules, and these rules are reflected in protocols, and these protocols are usually not explicit. And I think it would be super helpful if you basically look at the techno-feudalism and build on the protocols, and then start off your journey. That would be my proposal for the next book.
I fully agree, and I think it would be a really great idea. We really start with very, very simple examples, but there are many, many interesting more things. If you are talking about Amazon, Google's, and Facebook of the world, I think it's very interesting. If you visit a Facebook site or a Google ad site, then you as a customer are typically dealt on an ad market, and Sharon is coming, he's a professor with lots of money who bids for him to give him some advertising. It's very interesting to really dig deeper into the different types of market. Fully agree. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think we can go to the coffee break, because we have the next talk as well, and there will also be an opportunity to continue the discussion. So thanks again, Pete.
Schulden,
Also jedes Jahr tatsächlich vorgeschlagen, wir das gemeinsam organisieren. Ich habe mir alles, was ich mit Ihnen deswegen hatte ich gedacht, aber die Verbindung könnte man vielleicht herstellen, das würde ja nicht